Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strangeness of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for listening. Really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please go rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts if that's where you listen, or give us a rating on Spotify. That would be awesome if you did. You'd be amazing. Also, if the podcaster that you use allows you to rate, please do that as well. We have an awesome show ahead for you. But first, I want to talk about the Night House, which is the house that me and my husband bought. That's 200 years old and is very much haunted. You can go look at some of the videos and audio stuff that we've already caught on the cameras in the house over at the Night House on Facebook. And Night is spelled K-N-I-G-H-T. That was the family that lived there for at least 100 years and had the majority of the history in the house. Also, we have a website that is thenighthouseki.com. And here soon, we are going to open it up for paranormal investigations. So if you have a team or you and a bunch of friends like to go out and investigate, we'll be renting the house out overnight for you to actually stay there. We're going to have hopefully have a lot of perks that you don't find at other locations as well. Me as an investigator and going out and, you know, paying lots of money for places to rent them out. I understand, like, you deserve some of these, not even bells and whistles, not even extras, but just normal things that are, to me, are, you know, just something that you would expect to be there. And so hopefully we can give everybody a good time. And the house is amazing. And like I said, it definitely is ready to talk. And so anyway, go check out the Night House. And please follow us on Facebook and keep an eye on the website if you're interested in visiting. We're also going to do some historical tour stuff as well. So if you're interested in the history and not necessarily the paranormal, or you don't want to investigate the paranormal, we'll be doing history tours as well. So keep an eye there. And that will be happening soon. So today we are talking to Stevi, who is the host of Truth or Demons podcast. And on Truth or Demons, Stevi examines the lives of Ed and Lorraine Warren and the cases that made them famous. She tries to separate fact from fiction to find out who they really were and what were their real intentions. Because there's lots of things that they put out there themselves that don't make a lot of sense. They told a lot of stories in different interviews, and the stories change every time. So trying to separate fact from fiction with the Warrens, and were they really who we think they were, who people think they were, or they have, you know, different intentions. So if you're a fan of the Warrens and the movies like The Conjuring and stuff like that, we're not trying to shit all over that. We're just want the facts out there that they were people too, and they were flawed just like anybody else. And we're just telling the truth, and understand that, you know, sometimes money gets in the way. But anyway, sit back, relax, enjoy this episode with Stevi from Truth or Demons podcast, and go subscribe to her podcast. It is wonderful. The quality is amazing. Anywhere you listen to this show, you can find Truth or Demons podcast, and she is wonderful. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode. We'll see you next time. Hey, Stevi, welcome to the Unseen Paranormal. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah. I'm excited to have you on because I've been keeping up with your podcast, and I think the premise of it is amazing. But we'll get into that a little later. So, what got you into the paranormal to begin with, and to want to start the podcast?
Well, it probably started, of course, when I was a little kid. Like a lot of people I hear say it started around 8 for them, and that was me too. I saw my first ghost story turned into a movie, and I was hooked. That was The Entity, and I became absolutely obsessed with all ghost stories, witches, all of that stuff.
Yeah. I actually saw my first apparition when I was 8. So
nice.
Yeah, around the same age, and been haunted ever since. So, you know.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever gotten into investigating or anything like that?
Yes. When I was a teenager, so my mom is really into it too. So that's a big reason that I'm into it. And the reason I saw anything I saw when I was a kid, as far as movies go.
Yeah.
And then I never really investigated in a real professional sense. We would do things where we would pay either other groups or locations to go do overnights, or we just like run around Tennessee trying to find public locations we could just wander in at night and try to have an experience. So most of my ghost investigations was with my mom and us just trying to see if we could have an experience.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. I've been an investigator for over 20 years, so I've put on a bunch of events actually. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, you gotta start somewhere. You gotta go out and, get experience investigating somehow. So how did you come to start Truth or Demons podcast?
That started because of the Conjuring movie franchise. When the first film came out and I saw the preview and understood what the premise was going to be, that it was going to focus on the Warrens case files, which I'd always heard about but didn't have a whole lot of information on, as far as like it was never really mainstream information that I would have come across on any internet or TV shows. So everything I knew was just from other shows like, Paranormal State, stuff like that, where Lorraine would guest star. And then when this movie came out, I was so excited and it was so good. And as soon as they got to the villain, I still loved the film, but I instantly thought, this is outrageous. And I don't believe this for 1 second. And I need to know more. So I immediately started a deep dive into the history of the story and the location and this Bathsheba person. And that immediately drove me to want to start the podcast, because no one was talking about the truth. Everyone was immediately on this kick of Bathsheba. Bathsheba is a villain. I heard all the stories about how her grave got vandalized because of how the movie portrayed her. And I needed to have this outlet for not just myself, but for anyone else who might be interested in the truth. And I needed to put the info that I learned out there.
Yeah, I kind of, with my podcast, have a little connection with the Warren stuff as well. I had Andrea Perrin on.
Nice.
Because I wanted to know the truth about the Conjuring stuff. And I'm not a big fan of like the modern horror movies. I've never seen the Conjuring movies because I knew automatically, I've just known for a long time that the Warrens were to me, they're frauds. I don't know. I'll find out your opinion later. But to me, they're frauds, and they were just in it to make money. And one of the things with my podcast being connected to the Warrens too, when I first started, I was told by a person, I won't say who it is, but somebody who's deep in the paranormal world and has been for a long time. And they told me that if I talk shit about the Warrens or Zach Baggins, that I would get blacklisted. And I'm like, blacklisted from what? From what? What have they blacklisted me from,
So what I'm discovering is that you don't get so much blacklisted as you get like blackballed, as in they will start talking all kinds of crap about you. They will spread all kinds of rumors and they'll throw things until they stick. Then once they stick, they'll perpetuate, and you'll basically get shunned out of the community based on these false reputations that they create of people, I've noticed. And then the community is really into trying to, like, the people who will come after you for the things you say or the things you try to expose are the people that are trying really hard to push anyone out that has truth, that has any kind of dirt on anybody that needs exposed. These people will band together, and I'm seeing it happen to all kinds of different people in different angles, where if you say anything against them, they will come for you.
Well, all I can tell them is good luck. That's all. That's the only words I got for them, because it seems to me like these people have more dirty laundry than I ever will have. So,
oh yes, they do.
Yeah, and good luck digging anything up on me, because I've never been to jail, never been convicted of anything, So
that's the funny thing. The people that are slinging all this mud and trying so hard to get people banished from the community are the ones with criminal histories or things that they don't play well with others, and everyone's got a story about them, and it's really crazy that people listen to anything they say.
I also think because of people like you, there's a shift that's starting to happen in the paranormal community, just watching the pages and people and things, where people, I mean, even 6 months ago, you try to call somebody out for being a child molester or a sexual predator, and you get all this clap back. But now people are starting to kind of say, hey, wait a minute, we need to police our own community. And I think it's podcasts like yours that are kind of perpetuating this and helping this along as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm trying. It's hard when you have the kind of people that are trying to deny the facts. So it's really important, I think, and I've been commended for this, having receipts. It's really important to make sure you can back what you say and
Right.
prove what you say. Because if you don't, like people just see it as another person spreading rumors that they can attack for.
Yeah, and you have, these people like you're talking about from their side, from Nesper, and there's other places that are trying to gaslight you and me and all these other people, make us
Mm-hmm.
look like the crazy ones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's I don't understand it. I don't understand why there's all this so many people in the paranormal community that just doesn't understand that there are nasty people. And then like, even when you have evidence, like you're saying, there's this confirmation bias to where no matter what amount of evidence you show them, they're not going to want to believe it.
Yes, and they will argue it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you watching the Conjuring movies, you wanted to figure out, what the real story was. So how did you start going about that?
So I started first with like simple internet searches, like who was Bathsheba Sherman, and then the first things that'll pop up are how she was a witch and she murdered a baby and all these things. But if you go deeper into the search engines and you read more than just the first couple links that pop up, you'll find things about her actual history, her actual past. Some of the things that were said in the movie were flat out lies, and then some of the things were embellished. And I just went deeper and deeper, and I ended up on Ancestry's website, and that's how I discovered that she was in fact a real person that did not do any of the things she was accused of. She lived to be an old woman. She did have 3 children. One of them did pass away, but it was a time where children didn't always survive, and it was nothing to do with witchcraft or evil or
Right.
devil worship like she was accused of. She did not hang herself on the property, and that's a big rumor. And then they tried to change it to the Arnold woman hung herself, and there's no record of anyone hanging themselves on the property. It's interesting, and the only actual record of death they have on the property is a man who didn't even live there. I think he's considered a transient or a passerby, and he sat down drunk and on a cold night, and he died after he froze to death. So it had nothing to do with anything traumatic or no, violent deaths or witchcraft or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I remember correctly from talking to Andrea, Bathsheba only was on the property a handful of times. She never lived there or anything.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
She lived on another property, another like a ways away. She's buried nearby, but she definitely didn't live in that house.
Yeah. And so getting on that trail, how'd you get it onto the Warrens? Because I know the Conjuring movie is based on them or whatever, but the story's kind of separate from them as well.
Right. And I think it was because once I learned that story about Bathsheba in the film was so not true, I decided I needed to look more into the Warrens, because if this movie is supposed to be based on their lives and their case files, then what else are they lying about? And before I knew it, the next movie was out, and it was even worse as far as telling fibs goes. And I just kept looking into the Warrens more and following their history and trying to compare it to the movies. And then I also found people that knew the Warrens and compared their experiences with the Warrens to the movies versus, the research. And it's a big revolving door. It feels like sometimes I'm going back and forth all the time trying to follow up and compare and find out what's real.
Yeah. 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 I like how you've done the podcast where you start at the very beginning about talking, about the Warrens' early history before they were ever married, and how they got together, and starting from the very beginning, because that tells you a lot about somebody as well. Even back when Ed Warren, which is not even his real name,
Right.
it's his name is what, Warren Edward Minor, Miney,
Warren Edward Miney. Yep.
Miney, yeah. But he there's a record of him assaulting somebody and stealing from them, robbing
Yes,
them basically.
yes. When I found that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so, like, if you know Ed and you watched him over the years and his very volatile personality, it was very interesting and telling to know that he was that way as a 17-year-old. And he didn't get in any trouble as far as like there was no follow-up from police, and I'm pretty sure it's because he was in the Navy, and I'm sure they took care of it.
Yeah. I found it interesting how, if people go back and listen, they'll have to go back and listen to the episode we're talking about, but how there's so much contradicting information in different records that you found of the actual record versus what they said in interviews, and it's all kind of weird and muddled.
Yes, they go back and forth.
Yeah, even on like tiny details that don't really matter. They've changed up over the years in interviews and things.
Yes, and it cracks me up how you can listen to them talk about a story in 1980 and then in the early 2000s, the same exact story is totally different.
Yeah. What I like is exposing them too, because there's so many people who think that they are, you know, the gods, the grandparents of the paranormal, you know, and they're just these, you know, just as shisty as like the Victorian spiritualists back in the late 1800s.
Exactly. I really think once they started understanding it could be used like that, they really ran with it.
Yeah, and they've been involved with so many famous cases, but then if you think about it too, the cases are famous partially because of them, or all because of them.
Right, right. And my favorite story, when I first dug into the Warrens, I was trying to find their earliest involvement with the paranormal that was documented. And I found a story that Ed himself tells where they went up to deliver a painting up somewhere, and they ended up in Henniker. And Ed had heard or read a story about a haunted house in Henniker, and he wanted to go check it out. So they drive up there, and it turns out it's the Ocean-born Mary house. And Ed talks about how they go and they visit with the man who owned the property, and he tells them all about the haunting, and takes them around the property, and Lorraine has an experience, and this, that, and the other. And then in the 60s later, either it was the 60s or 70s, and whenever the man was about to pass away, he admitted that he faked it all.
Wow.
And so one of their first investigations, quote unquote, was at a fake haunted house.
Yeah, and they just kind of progressed. And like with the Conjuring House, for anybody who doesn't know, has never heard the story, like with the Conjuring House is kind of what really kind of thrust them even more into the spotlight. Yeah, they lied about that whole thing too, as far as there was no exorcism. It was a seance. And the parents did not call them to the house. It was actually the twins, and I can't think of their name. One of them was a self-proclaimed demonologist, and the other one, I think his name was Keith.
Yeah, Keith and something Johnson, right?
Yeah. And he actually went to a college where they were speaking, and he's the one that brought them to the parents' house. And they reluctantly let them in, and they ended up with the father punching Ed Warren in the face.
Right, yeah, and people don't talk about that.
Yeah, because they thought, and Andrea Perrin still gets upset to this day, talking about when her mother was thrown across the room, they thought her mother was dead.
And all Ed cared about was continuing the seance.
Yeah, and they tried to come back one more time, and they were kicked off the property again. So that one movie, The Conjuring, comes from supposedly their files, and they were only there one day. Not even a whole day.
Right. Yeah, when I actually got to interview Andrea as well, and I asked her about some things about that, and she clarified, and she said that they never gave permission to them, and so they didn't end up writing a book about their story, but they did go to all their lectures with the story and talk about it, and they even put ads in the newspaper that said the bewitched farmhouse, and then would talk about the Perrin family without giving, well, according to Andrea, she says they gave their name and address, and then according to some people, they changed it. But there's also a newspaper article written by Tony back in, I think, the 70s or 80s, late 70s, probably early 80s, where he changed the name to Baron, and the title of the article is something about a haunted fashion model, and he's referring to Carolyn Perrin, and then proceeds to talk about the ghost that haunts this farmhouse, even though they weren't given permission. So they changed the names and such. And like the whole reason the movie even got made was because after years and years of trying to get it made and get the parents to sign off on it, they ended up changing the perspective of the story to that of the Warrens. So they didn't actually need the parents' permission anymore.
Yeah. And Tony is their son-in-law, right?
Son-in-law. Yes.
Yeah. And he's kind of carrying the torch, not that they're both gone now, but we can get into that later.
Right.
So yeah, moving on from The Conjuring, you also have, which is probably one of the most famous hauntings in history all over the world, is the Amityville Horror. And that was what a lot of people don't understand, is that the Warrens were majorly involved with that. Because I think the original Amityville, you don't really see them much in the movie. because it was more about the family and what happened. So it wasn't focused on the Warrens. And the book is not really focused on the Warrens, but they are very much behind all of that happening. The book and the movie and all the publicity, they kind of were pulling the puppet strings.
And I think, so they're mentioned in the book, and the Jay Anson that wrote the book, he gives them mention, but I feel like, because there's that whole story of the lawyer trying to convince the Lutzes to write the book and blame it on demons so he can get DeFeo off on the demon thing. And they're like, no, we don't want to give him any money. And then I feel like George I have opinions about George, but I feel like he was a little greedy in this sense and wanted the book to himself. And that's why the Warrens weren't included in writing it and just kind of given a little bit of credit.
Yeah.
But I think the reason that happened was because the Warrens were trying really hard to investigate, and the Lutzes didn't want anyone to debunk them. And so once they wrote their book and they moved on, and then like they brought in, because they had that news crew, they brought in the Warrens and then a couple other psychics and the news people. And that's when it really started blowing up for the Warrens, because they were publicly involved at that point.
Yeah. I heard a story about a doctor from the Society for Psychical Research from England that came to the Amityville house when the Warrens were there. And he was at the house talking to the family and kind of looking around before the Warrens showed up, and he knew the Warrens were involved. And he kind of got snooping around because he thought something was fishy about the house. And he also claimed to be a sensitive, and he didn't feel anything in the house that was off or anything. And so he wasn't believing their story. So he's kind of snooping around the kitchen, and he opened a drawer and found a contract for movie rights and book rights. And he was trying to sneak out the back door when the Warrens showed up, and they cornered him. And because he was from this esteemed society in England that's been around since the 1800s, they tried to get him on film to endorse that the place was haunted, and he wouldn't. And he finally got away from them, and that was the one and only dealings he ever had with the Warrens, because the Society for Psychical Research is very serious about, investigating hauntings and things and doing experiments and stuff. And and I can't think of his name, but he was a big part of that. And he publicly denounced it, but nobody listened to him because there's so much publicity with the Warrens and with the story.
That's really interesting. I'd not heard that, but that's pretty wild. And it makes me wonder why the Warrens weren't more included in the movie.
Yeah. Well, he just said that he found a contract with their names on it. I don't know. That might have been something Warrens had, that never got signed. But that was one of the things that tipped him off, that he didn't want anything to do with it. And yeah. And I talked to Dr. Callum Cooper, who's a parapsychologist, and he actually knew this. He's part of the Society for Psychical Research over in London as well. And Callum's younger, but he knew this doctor as he was older before he passed away, and he got that story firsthand from him about Amityville.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
And I think I know that doctor you're talking about. I think I've seen him before online.
Yeah. He's famous with the Society of Psychical Research, and the name is escaping me. Callum, he used it in the episode that I talked to him on last season, and we had a little we chatted about the Amityville Horror and the Warrens a little bit, and that's a story that he told on there, but I found that telling as well. But that's kind of a little bit more behind the curtain, like a firsthand account of them being kind of frauds and things. And also what really pisses me off about that with the Amityville Horror is that people really did die. Like not long before, they started publicizing this. This dude killed his entire family,
and the murders get kind of overlooked.
Yeah, and this family's getting blamed for the Amityville Horror too. Their ghost, or their spirits or whatever, instead of being remembered. Yeah, for the kids being slaughtered in their beds by their brother, and the parents being slaughtered by their son. Yeah, it kind of gets overshadowed by this fake story that's been perpetuated for years.
Yes.
And so after that, the Warrens, they were on a roll after the Amityville Horror and the Conjuring.
Yeah, they really were.
So where did they end up next?
So there was a lot of stuff going on in this time period. Actually, it was right at the same time of Amityville was the Lindley Street haunting, and even though that's not considered one of their cases, they had a big involvement in it. Yeah. And that was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And then in the very similar time frame was the Enfield story as well, where they ran over to England for a day and claimed to have saved this family's life, you know, when they didn't.
Yeah, and it's funny if you go and watch, there's a documentary, a really good documentary where they use the original tapes that they recorded, the audio tapes, and they just have, I don't know if you've seen this about the Enfield poltergeist. It's on Apple Plus TV.
I've been meaning to watch that. I actually saw that. I have it on my watch list.
It is phenomenal. And anybody interested in that case, the investigators who were actually investigating it recorded audio, basically 24/7, trying to catch this phenomena. And they used the audio with actors to reenact the entire case. And I don't remember the Warrens being mentioned on there once in that whole documentary about it.
So yeah, they were there. They do have a recording of their own, but it's, you know, of course, not very long and not very convincing as far as, like, they talk about it in their book and how terrifying it was, and then you listen to the actual recording and they're goofing off and they're laughing and nothing is flying around.
Yeah, in that documentary, I don't remember anything because, like I said, these were the actual investigators who were staying there 24/7 for months on end, you know, trying to figure out this poltergeist activity and this terrified family. But yeah, it's so interesting that they just they inserted themselves for one day, just like the Conjuring house, you know, for one day, and now they're making movies about these things. And then, like, you get to Annabelle, which is a very interesting story in itself. And then the fact that they chose to use this completely different doll for the movie. Yeah. And so that's what people think Annabelle is, but Annabelle's just a Raggedy Ann doll.
Yeah, I actually saw someone on Reddit having an argument, and this woman was convinced she had one of those movie Annabelles when she was a child.
Yeah, and I'm sure some prop master made that.
Yeah, oh yeah, Tony Rosen's made it.
Yeah, so it was just made specifically for the movie. There's no doll that ever looked like that before the movie.
Right, and the man that made it, that was his first major gig.
Oh, wow. I've not seen any of those movies. I mean, just for full disclosure, I've not seen any of the Warren movies.
I understand. Sometimes I can't get through them very easily. Yeah. I've watched them all so many times, and some of them I have to stop and start over and over again.
And with Annabelle, I'm on the fence about haunted objects to begin with. And, you know, the story of Annabelle from the Warrens' perspective doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. And I know there's a lot of contradicting stories as well. If it even happened, or, you know, if however this doll supposedly got haunted even happened or anything like that. So what's the story behind Annabelle?
This is one of my favorites because I did so much deep research on Annabelle simply because when I started the podcast, I got under the skin of the NESPR members a little bit, the New England Society for Psychic Research, and their lead investigator is a man named Dan. And I did a couple interviews that he was kind of upset about just because of who the people were, not because of what they said. And he decided to reach out to me and initially wanted to tell me, quote unquote, his side of the story, which I didn't really understand, but he didn't tell me a side of any story. He just wanted to tell me that he knew Annabelle was real because when he was 8 years old, he witnessed the motorcycle accident that she caused where the man died and the woman spent a year in the hospital. Do you know that story?
Yeah. I don't know if the audience is familiar with it.
So it started coming around about the mid 80s, I would say. It's on the Seekers of the Supernatural's TV show from back then where Ed talks about it. And apparently there was a man and his girlfriend came to the museum, and they were inside the museum and they were mocking Annabelle, and Ed saw them and asked them to leave, told them, you know, you can't do that, you need to leave. So they left. And on their way out, they were riding a motorcycle and they hit a tree, and the man apparently died instantly, and the woman spent a year in the hospital. And Lorraine says this too. She tells this story in another interview where she knew the woman, and the woman spent a year in the hospital. So Dan decides to tell me, the senior lead investigator of NESPR currently, that when he was 8 years old, he was riding down, and this is really funny because he had to tell me a specific road. And he said it was Route 25 headed towards Route 8 towards Bridgeport, from Monroe to Bridgeport. And the motorcycle apparently passed him and his father going too fast, went around him. And the dad made a comment about how they're going to wreck, they're going too fast. And they come around the corner and they have in fact wrecked. The man apparently passed away, and the woman, he said he saw her on the side of the road holding her head and she was bleeding. And he's very detailed about this story. He says he was 8 years old. He says, the road it was on and everything. And because he did that, it really irked my nerves because I felt like I was being lied to from the second he opened his mouth.
Right.
And so I went and did the research. And if that happened on that road, there would have been some sort of record. There would have been a newspaper article. There would have been something.
Right.
So I started searching. I can't find any newspaper articles whatsoever that coincide with this story. There's plenty of motorcycle accidents, plenty of fatalities even, unfortunately, but none of them include a female passenger that lived. So since I can't find these records, I even contacted, I went really deep into this. I contacted the libraries. I contacted the police departments that were local. The libraries even helped me contact bigger libraries to see if maybe they had record that the smaller ones didn't. Couldn't find anything. So then I turned to this Facebook group, and the Facebook group is of people who grew up in and around Bridgeport and Monroe in the 70s and 80s. And I post and I ask, does anybody remember a motorcycle accident where the man passed away and the woman survived? And this is the route it was on, and this is the year it was in. And immediately someone comments and says, that road wasn't open until 2 or 3 years later. So there couldn't have been an accident on it. So that debunked, as far as Dan's story is concerned, that completely made him out to be a liar.
Right.
I do not believe this incident happened whatsoever. There is no documentation to back it. But to further that, because I got so into deep diving this, I ended up locating, through a helpful anonymous tip, I located the original Annabelle owner. And also, someone provided me with a newspaper clipping from 1975-ish that was written by an author named Jill Amadio, and she apparently was the first person to write up this story in the newspaper. And she was still around and still working, so I reached out to her and I interviewed her. I got to speak to her about what it was like to see Annabelle. She got to take Annabelle to the new studio with her. It was really interesting to talk to her, but then to locate Annabelle's actual owner was really bizarre because she didn't speak directly with me. She spoke with someone who helps me with my research on another Facebook group kind of situation where they had a little brief interaction where she declared the doll was hers. She also declared that Hollywood makes up a lot of stuff and that she didn't want anything to do with the doll.
Wow.
So it's bizarre. The fact that she exists, the fact that the woman who wrote the article is still around and spoke on it,
Yeah.
it was just wild to me. But I still believe that the Warrens made it up because of the Twilight Zone episode in season 5, episode 6, I believe, the Living Doll episode.
Yeah.
It's way too much like Annabelle, and then the fact that one of the characters' names is Annabelle.
Yeah, that's taken right from Hollywood.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's I'm with you. That's no coincidence, especially with the storyline and the name. And yeah, that's not coincidental. Not at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And then there's another case that they had a lot to do with murder again.
Mm-hmm.
The boy was supposed to be possessed.
Mm-hmm. David Glatzel.
And then the boyfriend of his sister, was it her husband or
her boyfriend? Yeah. Until they did get married while he was in prison.
Okay. So but at the time when he murdered the guy, it was her boyfriend.
Right.
Yeah. And he claimed this demonic thing influenced him and he killed their landlord, I believe, if I remember the story correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have yet to cover this because there is so much, and I've been trying really hard to gather everything that I can and speak to as many people as I can. But it's a really wild case.
Yeah, and the guy, he's already out of prison. He's been out of prison for a while.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He only did 5 years.
Yeah.
For manslaughter.
Yeah. In that case, the Warrens actually, I believe they testified that it was demonic influence and.
They tried to, but the judge said, absolutely not. I will not have it in my courtroom. Yeah. So they actually stood outside the courts and spoke to the news about how it was unfair and unjust to not give him the chance at them testifying on his behalf. Yeah.
And you got to think all the press they did, they were always the ones out in front of the camera. The people who were really trying to help these people never wanted any press.
Mm-hmm. And that's why they got fired from Lindley Street. They called the press and the family didn't want that. So they sent him away.
I think about the Warrens as the first para-unity people, because I always say I'm not all for para-unity, because the people who are screaming para-unity the loudest are the ones that they just want the attention. There's nothing about para-unity at all in the paranormal community. It's not about unifying the community. It's about them being the cult leader of the paranormal. basically.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the Warrens were. Like, they wanted to yell the loudest, so they got the most attention.
Mm-hmm. And they wanted to sound like everything they said was straight fact, undeniable, don't question it, this is the way it is.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's get into them two specifically, like personally. So with Ed Warren, did he ever receive any kind of training as a demonologist? Because he proclaimed himself a demonologist.
So I've not found any proof of that. It's a bunch of hearsay. It's a bunch of, he worked with this priest, he worked with this guy, he worked with this clergyman. There's a lot of names thrown around. There's a lot of rumors about each of those names. The only thing I know for sure is he said he was born a demonologist. He didn't try to be one. He just simply was.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also, I saw where there's some question about Lorraine proclaiming to be a psychic,
mm-hmm.
because she really didn't start talking about that until later on. Like in the beginning, she didn't say much about it, and then all of a sudden she was psychic. So
according to Lorraine, it started when there's so many different interviews, and of course the book says something else, but in one instance she said she was a little kid, like 8 or 9. Another instance she said she was younger. Another instance she says she was older. One instance she says her first experience with being psychic was she noticed Mother Superior's lights being different than another nun's lights, and she was reprimanded, and by that she means like their aura, the light that surrounded them, she could see that. And then in another explanation, she says the first time she experienced any psychic ability was when she was at a tree planting on Arbor Day at her school, and they planted a new sapling, and she said right before her eyes she saw it grow to its full maturity, and she looked up to see its big beautiful branches, and a nun noticed her looking up and asked her what she was doing, and she said she could see the tree all grown up, and they reprimanded her for that. So there's a couple different stories.
I saw a story one time, and I believe it was an interview with her, that she said that a case that they were on very early on is when she walked in, she all of a sudden could talk to the dead. Something along those lines. And that was from her. And it may have been when she was on Paranormal State that she told that story. But that's the story I remember hearing from her, was that she, in one of the cases that her and Ed did early on, something happened to her. She passed out or something. And when she woke up, she was all of a sudden a medium.
Oh, wow. I've not heard
something
that version.
Something crazy like that. Yeah. I'll have to see if I can find it and send it to you.
I did hear a similar one where when they went to the Ocean-born Mary house, she claims in 2 different interviews that I've seen that her first out-of-body experience was 2 different things. One was at the Ocean-born Mary house. She said she had her first astral experience. And then I think, I may be wrong about this, but I think in another interview she said her first out-of-body experience was in Amityville. So I could be wrong about that, but she did say 2 separate places, and the first one was the Ocean-born Mary house.
Yeah, and see all those contradictions. Mm-hmm. I mean, they all add up. They all seem insignificant.
Yes.
Until, like you've been talking about, they have all these different contradictions in different interviews. If you're telling the truth, the story's going to stay mostly the same.
Exactly.
Because you don't have to remember the lie.
Mm-hmm. And then back then, when they first started doing appearances and interviews, you couldn't go and look this up on the internet. You couldn't go and rewind it and watch it again and compare it to the other one you saw a couple of days prior. Like, that wasn't a thing. So they had all this confidence in the world to say whatever they wanted to say.
Yeah. And the one person out of this entire thing with the Warrens that I just want to like, and I've never heard a bad thing about the guy, is John Zaffis.
Same.
He just seems like he is nothing like them.
Right.
And actually has the intention, and has for a long time, other than the one TV show that he had with the Haunted Collector stuff, mm-hmm. He's just been trying to help people for years without being in the spotlight. And all that.
And he never involves himself in drama. He always steers clear of it. He never participates in he said, she said. He's very much in it for the reasons we want to be in it. And the reasons people like you and me are doing what we're doing. We want the truth. Right. We don't want the drama. We want the real facts. And none of the embellished nonsense for money.
Yeah, and for people that don't know, John Zaffis is their nephew.
Yes, he was Babe, Ed's sister's son.
But yeah, he's just the one I've looked for stuff because I'm like, because he grew up going to cases with them, and he was interested in the paranormal, even though none of the rest of their families were. And he got interested. I believe he went on his first case with them like 16 or 17, maybe even younger than that.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, and he seems to be the one that's the most like level-headed and least crazy, and I've always found him to be credible.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
And then we get to Tony, which what's up with the oven mitts? And Annabelle.
So it was brought to my attention when I started the podcast that oven mitts were used to handle Annabelle. So I looked into it. I went and watched the videos, and I heard them talk about it, and it is explained. Tony explains it. I believe Dan explains it in another video. There's so many videos of them with the oven mitts. They're actually welding gloves. They're heavy duty welding gloves. They've been embellished with saints and relics of religion, and have been blessed by whichever priest they're working with at the time, and it makes them be able to makes it so you can handle Annabelle safely. For things like transporting her to a suitcase to take her to Las Vegas on an airplane.
Yeah. And that wood and glass case supposed to.
Yeah. So about that, they're on their second or third one, because when Dan joined the scene, he apparently felt that the current case was not protection enough, and rebuilt it. So now the new case is built by Dan with more protection.
Wow. The whole story is just wow. The more that I hear about it, the more wow it gets.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to watch the videos, like, because there's so many people out there who have made YouTube videos where they get to go to the museum, where they get to see Annabelle, where they get to talk to Dan and Tony and do their interviews and hear their stories. And each time I watch, it's just so hard to take in that these are grown men who are being serious. Right. They're not kidding. They're not doing this for fun. They're not pretending that it's real. They tell you they believe it's real. So that is a whole other conversation as well.
Well, I mean, follow the money. Have you looked who's benefiting the most from the movies, these big blockbuster movies? Yeah, it has to be Tony and his wife and, the family, I imagine.
I wonder about this. I have not, I initially assumed it would be Tony benefiting, or at least Judy, because Judy is, their daughter. And then of course, Tony being married to her would mean he would benefit. But I'm curious because I saw an interview where Lorraine said that she and Ed sold their life rights to Warner Brothers. So I wonder if Tony and Judy aren't getting any money, or if they did get some, but it's not like a continuous kind of thing, because they are trying so desperately hard to keep Annabelle relevant.
Yeah.
And they're trying so hard to keep the museum items relevant. They've gone and made a road tour of the haunted objects, and they have their Paracon every year that they sometimes take Annabelle to. So it seems like it kind of seems like they're in need of money, that they're not getting maybe as much as we might think from Warner Brothers. Because I feel like, in my personal opinion, I feel like Warner Brothers is a little greedy in this sense, as they paid one time for the rights.
Right.
Now they can do whatever they want.
Yeah. That's the way it works in Hollywood. And
so that makes me wonder if Tony's getting any of it. And if not, is that why he's trying so hard and getting so mad at me?
Well, I think even if you look at it as a byproduct, how much more popular have they become with the doll?
Exactly. Yes.
And all these conventions who actually pay them to come, how much money they're paying them to bring this stupid Raggedy Ann doll.
Right. And also this recent Paracon they're planning, they've been announcing all these celebrity guests. They have the woman that played the nun coming. They have Ryan Buell coming. They have a couple other horror actors that are coming. Like, they're trying to piggyback off the movie, like, really hard.
Yeah. they're shiesty people. They're fraudulent people. So they're going to do whatever they can to make money. I agree. They're perpetuating this myth of, all these different myths of all these cases. And And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, it's going to benefit them too, whether they get money from Warner Brothers or not, is what I was getting at. I just think, it's
Right.
trickling down to them with whether it's their YouTube videos are popular or their social media, they're making money somehow. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're getting paid, $5,000-$10,000 to show up at a convention with the doll.
Oh yeah. Well, Zach paid him $5,000 to bring Annabelle to Vegas. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then with their own Paracon, and then they have Nesper, and then they have another society, don't they?
they have the Warrens Foundation,
Yeah.
which I don't think Tony has much to do with. I hear different things. There's a couple like sister or brother companies to Nesper, and it would be like the Warrens Foundation in different locations.
Yeah.
So different parts of the country has their own Warrens Foundation. Also, I think a grandson runs one of the foundations. I think Chris is his name. I haven't looked into him a whole lot, but I've heard that he is involved a little bit, and he's also related. So there's a lot. There's so much and so many angles as far as like trying to claim a connection to the Warrens.
Yeah. Yeah. There was some drama last year with one of the Warren Foundation, quite a few of those people, with people getting kicked out and other people being part of it. And I've had a couple of people who have reached out to me to be on the show as guests, and I get to read through their bio, and as soon as I see the Warren Foundation, I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
I've been contacted by a priest that was part of the Warrens Foundation, and he offered to help me, and I said thank you, and I'm always really polite and stuff, but there are times where I don't want the biased info. I want stuff that people can't spin in any way. You know what I mean? Like a real experience or something that happened to them versus an agenda they're trying to push.
Right. Yeah, and I just look at it, they're trying to use my show to push their agenda.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Dan tried to do that with me too. When he called me and he wanted to tell his side,
yeah,
he wanted to give me tickets to Paracon and let me in the museum and explore and such.
Oh, trying to bribe you and butter you
up. That's exactly how I felt, and I was like, "But you're talking to me because you already don't agree with what I'm doing."
Yeah. You've talked to some of the friends of the Warrens as well, people who actually kind of outside of their circle of the paranormal stuff. What did you learn about them from talking to some of those people?
So one of my favorite guests that did have really extensive experience with the Warrens, as far as like he could call them friends, was Frank Chiafari. And when he was a young man, he met Ed, and Ed kind of took him under his wing and taught him about paranormal investigation, and hung out with him all the time. And some of the stories I heard from Frank and his wife about the Warrens are some of the sweetest stories. They seemed like really, as far as like in this friendship, they seemed like really good people, really caring, always trying to include Frank and make sure he felt welcome. And I love hearing Frank's stories because it makes the Warrens sound like how you think they should be based on the movies.
Yeah.
And it's cool to know that those were real stories.
Yeah. Now with Ed, you've had stories of like, the father of the parents punching him in the face, and like you've heard other things about him being a hothead, but Lorraine, like all the stories I've ever heard about her when people have met her, was that she's a very, very sweet lady, and never really said a bad word about anybody. Like that's just kind of what people have said about her. I want to believe myself that the Warrens originally got into it to do good things, like Hans Holzer and these others, who started the paranormal as we know it nowadays. And maybe that's just me wanting to have faith in humanity, that these people wouldn't start out just trying to defraud people. But I want to believe that they started out with good intentions to help people, and then the money just got in the way.
I hear that a lot. Exactly that they started out with their hearts in the right place. They knew what they wanted to do, and it's so easy to get blindsided by fame and money.
Yeah. And I don't want people to think that I'm just think they're just the worst people ever and that they hurt the paranormal community. I think they did lots of good things by bringing it to the forefront and bringing press to it. Right.
And the whole beginning to investigate. We investigate because they investigated.
Right. Yeah. So I think they have their place, and the same as like Zach Baggins. I can't stand him, but and I don't agree with what he does with his TV show, but with his TV show being so popular, it helps the mainstream, it helps in the long run. It helps my podcast. It helps your podcast because more people, are into the paranormal and want to hear these stories.
Exactly.
And things.
Yeah. And the people that want to dive deeper are the ones that find us. And those are the audience members we want.
Right. So I don't want to just think I don't want people out there, the audience, think that we're just vilifying these people. We just want the truth out there.
I get that a lot. I have people that won't even listen to the show, and they're already on this opinion of, I hate the Warrens and all I want to do is bash them. And that's not the case at all. I even had a conversation on another show, and then I had them on my show where we discussed how two things can be true at once. The Warrens could have been really decent humans with really heartfelt missions, but then money also could have made them feel they needed more of it.
Right.
So you can be nice and still be greedy.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, I'm with you. I just want the truth out there. I want these people not to be put on a pedestal as much as they are. I want people to understand that they were people and they were fallible.
Stuff to stop being perpetuated.
Right. Yeah, they were people and they were fallible. It doesn't mean they were evil or had evil intentions.
Exactly. Yeah. And also so my thing with Ed, I had a moment because I had really strong opinions of Ed when I started my podcast because of some things I've heard and some of the things I've read. And then I read a story about Ed when he was very ill and hospitalized, and it pulled at my heart so much that I wanted to cry for the man because his religion was so ingrained in him that when he was sick in a hospital bed, he had a nurse come in and check on him. And according to this story I read, I don't know if it's true or not. I think I read it on the internet of like an account of someone who had this experience with him. And apparently when he opened his eyes, the nurse was leaning over him to check on him. And the nurse happened to be wearing a pentagram around her neck. And he got so scared, he started screaming for her to get away from him because he was scared of her necklace.
Wow.
And that to me is a lack of knowledge. It's a fear based on lack of knowledge. And he didn't know that she wasn't evil just because she was wearing that necklace. He truly believed that. So it made my heart hurt a little bit for him that his knowledge was so limited by his beliefs.
Yeah. And also it could very well be one of those things, if you go looking for something hard enough, you'll find it. You'll find evidence of it. Mm-hmm. If you have that tunnel vision, you will find exactly what you're looking for every time, even though it might not be rational or anything like that. You'll find signs that what you're looking for is real and happening,
Right. Yeah. Confirmation bias.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to kind of end on that of, that we don't think these people were the devil or demons. And I never took that. I haven't taken that from your show at all. And so
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think the way that you're approaching it, I think you have not villainized them at all. I think you're putting the facts out there and down to the individual, like I was talking about, the individual details of, okay, well, one interview, they said this, another interview, they said that. So you make up your own mind,
right.
what the true story is, because we don't know.
Exactly.
So what do you have next for the podcast coming up? Because I know you just went through some shit with him fighting with you because Tony had a guest on who is a convicted child molester. And when you called him out, they kind of you got some clap back from them for that.
Very much so. They're very upset with me. I am still being harassed by followers of Joe who support him. It could be Joe. I honestly don't know. I know one of the comments was Joe. He actually used his name. But there's another person that has said, I'm going to be sorry when he gets exonerated and comes for me and all this drama. But then, of course, Nesper's really mad at me, too, because they tried to platform this man so before I even knew about his crimes, I was upset because they were trying to platform this man with a story that was not his own. He made up a story to include himself in the very famous, very well-documented Lindley Street haunting. And Tony only saw dollar signs. Yeah. He immediately thought, I can write a book about this. We can resurrect this story with this new information, this new character that no one can disprove in any way because everyone else is gone. And they have this man on this YouTube interview where he's telling his story about how he was 7 years old and he was in this house with this haunting with this little girl who actually did experience it. Her name is Marcia. And the whole time he's talking so ill of her, it was making my blood boil. He was talking about how she was abusive to him, how all he wanted was to be loved, and she just made him feel like he wasn't wanted. Like,
wow.
He just said so much terrible things about her, and my blood was boiling, and I was so upset. And my mission was not to expose his criminal record. My mission was to expose him as a liar for this story. And that immediately led me to his criminal record. The moment I looked up this man to find out who he was and if he had any ties to Bridgeport, Connecticut in 1974, all of his reports pulled up, and there are many. There is only one of the sexual assault on him on minor under 14, but he's got domestic violence charges. He's got assault on police officers. He's got umpteen traffic violations. I don't know how you can get that many traffic violations, and in multiple states.
Yeah.
So for my trolls to be coming at me the way they are and telling me that Joe is a good man and none of this is true and I'm going to be sorry, just really kind of cracks me up.
Well, and I mean, the charges for the sexual assault on a minor were like 20-something years ago, so how's he going to get exonerated?
Well, yeah, exactly. So that was another thing. When Tony finally admitted that this was what was going on, and then they decided not to platform him anymore, he made a comment how it was so long ago. And yes, it was in 1997 that this particular charge, but just last year, he got a failure to register for that charge. If you are a convicted sex offender, what other reason do you have except to hide that you don't want to register?
Right.
If you are so innocent and you are trying so hard to exonerate yourself, why are these charges still happening?
Well, I'll tell you a little personal experience of mine with somebody like that. I have a family member who was charged on 2 counts of rape of a child and was found guilty back in the 90s. And I can tell you right now, he has not changed one bit whatsoever. He's still the biggest pervert that he ever has been, and he will never change. And there's been other allegations that have come out against him that couldn't be proven. But and he's done the same thing. He's actually used my address one time to register when he does not live here, because at the time he was living next door to an elementary school.
Oh my goodness!
So I know people can change, but I don't think people like that change. Not in my experience.
I have to agree, and especially with like there's so many charges, and for him, if he really did, so if it was a misunderstanding or if it was I hate to say a slip. It's not a slip up. There is no excuse for these charges. Right. But there are times when people lie or a charge is invalid or whatever. This is not one of those times, in my opinion, because if it were, it would have been cleared up a long time ago, and he wouldn't still be trying, quote, still be trying to clear it up now. That's not how that works.
Right. Yeah. And it's the same with my family member. His rap sheet is, a mile long. And so there's nothing there that would ever tell me that he didn't do what he was, found guilty for and spent time in prison for, Same with this guy.
Right.
And like I said, I just don't, those type of people are, whether he's been caught again or not. And this is just my speculation, my opinion. I don't know this guy, and he just has the one charge, but there's usually suspicion around them for other crimes that are similar. And whether those can be proven or not, I don't know. But, so it tends to be like psychologically, it tends to be a pattern of behavior is what I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. I don't know this guy, like I said, I agree. And that's just my opinion. But those type of people, in my opinion and my experience, don't change. They continue with that behavior, whether they get caught again or not.
I agree. And I feel like when they're trying so hard, so when he went on Tony's show and they were telling this story, Tony says at the beginning, some of the names will be changed for the privacy of those involved. The only name that was changed was his name. And if you're a decent, honest person, you think you'd use your real name, but then that would, of course, in turn expose his criminal history. But if you have that criminal history and you know that people will find it, you're going to change your name and expect to get away with it.
Right. And even at the very least, even if he didn't have that criminal history, if he used his real name, the people that were involved with that case that he's trying to insert himself into, as far as the haunting, you know, they might come out and say, no, he had nothing to do with it. So he's going to use a
Exactly.
pseudonym. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was even someone in the comments while this whole live was going on where he was telling his so-called story, where people are asking, hey, did you talk to Bill Hall, who is the author of the book, who did all the research for this case?
Yeah.
And I talked to Bill, and I asked Bill, was this man present for any of this? And he said he's never heard of that man.
Wow.
And so that is my next case. I will be actually covering Lindley Street and telling what really happened. And yeah, and Joe has no part in it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also these cases that you're covering too. It deserves to have the voice of the real story as far as we can tell out there, and not just calling these people out here trying to lie about, you know, the cases and trump them up and things, but yeah, getting the real story out there to honor the people that really did happen to, because this is something that happened in these people's lives that was probably horrific.
Exactly. And for Joe to come out and say all these negative things about Marcia, who isn't around to defend herself, who dealt with so much. This poor little girl, like, from the moment she was born, she had it hard. She was born into an abusive family. She was adopted at 4 years old by a loving yet overbearing family. Her adoptive mother was a helicopter parent and never let her do anything, never let her leave the house. You know, she was completely confined. And then this haunting happened, and then she's the butt of every joke in town once it blows over and they rule it a hoax. You know, once they decided it was a hoax, she was just the big joke.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot. There's a lot more too.
Yes. So much.
Yeah. And like we're saying, we don't want, you know, anybody to take away that this is all about trashing the Warrens or Tony or any of their family.
Right.
It's just about getting the truth. We
just want the truth.
Yeah.
Like, I have nothing against Tony except that he lies. If he didn't lie, there would be nothing for me to have to say about him. Yeah.
And if they would just come out and say with the Annabelle doll, like, these are the stories, but we don't know, you know?
Right. Instead of perpetuating as a straight up fact.
Right. And I've, you know, there's so many people that think the movies are true because it says from the case files of the Warrens, you know?
Yes.
And they think down to the T that they're true. And, you know, Andrea Perrin has had this campaign. She was a consultant on the movie, on the first Conjuring movie. But she's been on this campaign ever since to set the record straight about what really happened versus the Hollywood movies, you know, that they put out. And so, yeah, it's just it's crazy. But like I said in the beginning, I love that, you know, you're out there doing what you're doing with trying to bring the truth to light, and all these other people are too. It's kind of a change, and we need a change so that we can get these sexual predators and people like that and these frauds and fakes out of the paranormal and get down to the real reason of why we do it, you know?
Agreed.
All of us are trying to find, you know, what happens after we die, you know? I mean, that's the ultimate thing. So, but I think. And
it's not fair for the public to be bamboozled left and right. Why is it so hard to just give the facts and admit what we don't know, that we don't know it?
Yeah. Well, continue doing what you're doing, Stevi. You're doing an awesome job at it, and I'll continue to listen.
Thank you.
And my audience, go check out Truth or Demons podcast. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can also go check her out on YouTube as well and subscribe there. And I'll have all of the links in the show notes as usual, so y'all can go check her out. And thank you so much for coming on, Stevi. I really enjoyed the conversation. And like I said, keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Yeah, me too. It was my pleasure for sure. All right, everybody. Y'all stay safe out there. We'll see you next time. Have a good day. Thank you for listening to The Unseen Paranormal. Join me next Wednesday with a brand new guest. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. This helps more people discover the show. You can connect with me over on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or join us in the Unseen Paranormal Lounge group on Facebook. Until next time, remember, some of the scariest things are unseen.
You have come to the end of the line.